It was supposed to be an ordinary morning flight. Flight 209 of Global Airways was scheduled to depart from Dubai International Airport, heading toward London Heathrow, a routine route handled thousands of times before. On board were 257 passengers, including families, business travelers, and tourists. Among them was an 18-year-old girl named Ava Williams, sitting quietly near the middle rows, seat 14A, the window seat she always preferred. Ava wasn't just another passenger. She had grown up around airplanes. Her father was a pilot for a small regional airline, and she had spent much of her childhood watching him prepare for flights, fascinated by every control, every checklist. But despite her interest, she had never flown an actual plane, never touched real cockpit controls. Her experience was limited to a few flight simulator sessions and stories her father told. To the world, she was just a young passenger heading home after completing her first semester abroad. To fate, she was about to become something far greater. The morning air shimmered in the desert. Heat as the Boeing 787 taxied to the runway. Inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds and his co-pilot, First Officer Harris, completed their pre-flight checklists. Everything was normal, weather clear, instruments stable. No turbulence expected until over the Mediterranean. At precisely 8:42 a.m., the engines roared to life and the plane lifted off, climbing steadily into the clear blue sky. Seatbelt signs blinked off. Passengers relaxed. Flight attendants moved down the aisles with practiced calm. Serving drinks and smiles, Ava leaned against the window, watching the endless horizon. She loved this part of flying, the silence above the clouds, the illusion of peace. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, that peace would shatter completely. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights flickered once. Then again. A low alarm tone echoed faintly from the cockpit, too soft for passengers to notice, but sharp enough to catch the pilot's attention. Captain Reynolds frowned, glancing at the instrument panel. One of the electrical buses had just failed. Red indicators blinked in warning, followed by a sudden drop in cabin pressure alarms. They began to troubleshoot, following the emergency checklist precisely as trained. But within minutes, systems began failing one by one. Autopilot disengaged, communication links flickered, and then both pilots felt something even worse: dizziness, confusion. The oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. What had started as a minor electrical issue had turned catastrophic. A rare and undetected short circuit had triggered a chain reaction, affecting the air, circulation, and oxygen systems in the cockpit. Within seconds, the pilots were struggling to remain conscious. The aircraft was flying at 36,000 feet, a height where hypoxia sets in quickly. By the time the lead flight attendant reached the cockpit door, knocking frantically, both pilots were slumped over their controls. The plane was now flying on, autopilot, but disconnected from manual control and partially isolated from air traffic control. Inside the cabin, oxygen masks dangled from every seat. Passengers gasped and cried out, confusion spreading faster than the thin air. The flight attendants moved quickly, securing passengers and trying to reassure them that everything was under control. But it wasn't. Ava's instincts kicked in. While others panicked, she noticed something critical. The plane's altitude was beginning to drop erratically, not fast enough to be a dive, but enough to make her stomach twist. She tried to calm herself, breathing through the mask, scanning the cabin for any sign of the flight crew. That's when she saw the lead attendant rushing forward, pounding on the cockpit door, yelling for help through the interphone. Minutes later, word spread. Both pilots were unresponsive. A collective silence fell over the passengers. No one knew what to do. The idea that no one was flying the plane sent a shiver through every soul on board. The cabin crew knew the standard emergency procedure: seek any passenger with aviation experience. The announcement echoed through the cabin, trembling, urgent. If there is anyone on board with flight experience, please come forward immediately. No one moved. No pilot, no crew, no one raised a hand. Only Ava sat frozen, her heart racing. She wasn't a pilot. Not really. But she had years of knowledge, from her father's lessons and countless hours on simulators. Could she help? Could she even step inside that cockpit? Her hands trembled. She didn't move, not yet. The flight attendants tried again to open the cockpit door manually, but the safety locks wouldn't budge. The interphone connection to the cockpit was dead. They managed to re-establish a weak radio signal, but the static made communication almost impossible. On the other end, air traffic control could barely hear them, only faint words. Pilots, unconscious. No control. Controllers scrambled to reroute nearby aircraft, trying to locate the jet, visually using radar and transponder data. But Flight 209's signal was unstable, flickering in and out due to electrical issues. From the outside world, it was starting to look like the aircraft had gone dark. 20 minutes passed. The plane continued its slow, uncontrolled descent, dipping through 30,000 feet. Passengers prayed, cried, clung to one another. Ava couldn't take it anymore. Her heart pounded. As she stood up and approached, the flight attendants near the front. Her voice was shaky but steady enough. I know some of this stuff. My father's a pilot. I've trained on simulators. I think I can help. The lead attendant, pale and trembling, stared at her for a moment, then nodded. They had no other choice. With the help of a metal key override from the emergency panel, they forced the cockpit door open. The sight inside made everyone freeze. The captain and co-pilot slumped forward. Masks half on, eyes closed. Alarms blinked across every screen. The control yoke trembled slightly under autopilot resistance. Ava's stomach dropped, but her instincts took over. She recognized the instruments: altimeter, speed indicator, navigation displays. The flight management system was partially offline, but the basics were still functional. She strapped herself into the captain's seat, adjusting the headset. Her hands hovered over the controls, heart racing faster than the engines outside. Somewhere in the background, the radio crackled faintly, static mixed with distant voices. She caught fragments. Flight 209. Identify yourself. Do you copy? It wasn't clear, but it was enough. She pressed the transmit button. This is Global Airways Flight 209. The pilots are down. I'm a passenger. Please help me. A long pause followed. Then a calm voice answered through the static. Copy that, Flight 209. We read you faintly. Who is speaking? Ava closed her eyes, steadying herself. My name is Ava Williams. I'm trying to keep us steady. By now, radar centers across Europe had detected the unstable flight path of Flight 209. News outlets began reporting a communication blackout with a passenger jet carrying over 250 people. Fighter jets were scrambled for visual confirmation. Within the next 15 minutes, 2 Eurofighter Typhoons approached from the west, flying alongside the Boeing 787. Through their cockpit windows, they could see her. A young girl in a pilot's seat, headset on, holding the controls with white-knuckled determination. The world had no idea who she was yet, but live radar feeds and intercepted transmissions confirmed one shocking fact. A passenger, barely 18, was now in control of a 200-ton aircraft. The world was now aware that Flight 209 was in trouble. News stations broke the story within minutes. A Boeing 787 flying across Europe had lost contact with its pilots. The radar signal was unstable, and the only communication came from an unidentified, young voice claiming to be a passenger. Inside the aircraft, Ava Williams, just 18 years old, sat in the captain's seat. Her hands trembled, but her focus sharpened with every breath. The instrument panels before her flickered, half lit, half dead. The steady hum of the engines was the only sound that reassured her they were still flying. She didn't have training manuals or a co-pilot to guide her. She only had memory, the years of watching her father, the countless hours spent on flight simulators, and the echo of his words about what truly mattered in emergencies. A pilot's first job is to stay calm. The aircraft will always do what you tell it, if you understand it. And so she began to understand. The Boeing 787 was still under partial autopilot, holding altitude at 28,000 feet but losing stability. Ava scanned the control displays: altitude, speed, heading. Several warnings blinked red. Autopilot fail. Cabin pressure low, communication link lost. Her first task was simple: keep the plane level. She wrapped her hands around the control yoke and made a gentle correction, steadying the aircraft's slight right roll. The engines responded immediately, a subtle vibration running through the deck. She could feel the massive jet obey her touch, even through layers of machinery. Then she reached for the oxygen switch and increased cabin flow, bringing life back to the passengers behind her. The warning alarms dulled, replaced by the steady rhythm of engine hum. Somewhere in the static-filled headset, the voice of an air traffic controller came through again, faint but firm. The signal improved as the aircraft moved closer to mainland Europe. Ava could now hear short bursts of words, coordinates, headings, guidance. They knew she was young, untrained, and alone. But she wasn't giving up. Outside, the weather began to shift. As Flight 209 crossed into the eastern Mediterranean airspace, clouds thickened into layers of silver mist. The once clear morning had turned into a gray maze of turbulence. The sun disappeared behind clouds, and streaks of rain began to strike the windshield. Through it all, Ava held the controls steady. Her mind raced with calculations. Altitude, descent rate, airspeed, things she had only practiced in simulations. The Boeing 787's flight management system was partially offline, so every adjustment had to be manual. The fighter jets that had joined her, 2 Eurofighters, stayed close, their sleek frames gliding beside the massive passenger jet. Through the cockpit glass, she could see one of the pilots raising a hand, signaling her to stay calm. For the first time since the crisis began, she didn't feel alone. On the ground, a massive coordination effort was underway. Emergency runways were being cleared in multiple countries: Athens, Rome, even Istanbul, just in case she needed to land. Air traffic control had confirmed visual contact. A young woman at the controls, flying steady despite partial system failure. Engineers at Global Airways, headquarters, worked feverishly to patch together every piece of telemetry, data they could recover. They sent basic flight instructions through the controller frequencies. Simplified, clear, designed for someone without a pilot's license. Maintain altitude. Follow fighter escort. Prepare for emergency descent. Those were the only steps she had to trust. Back in the passenger cabin, fear had turned into stunned silence. The announcement had spread. An 18-year-old passenger was flying the plane. Mothers held their children tighter. Strangers prayed together. Every bump of turbulence felt like the end. But none of them could deny the strange calm that seemed to return. The flight attendants moved quietly, helping passengers stay seated, securing the aisles, preparing for a possible landing. Despite their training, they too looked toward the cockpit with silent hope. Ava was their only chance. After nearly 3 hours in the air, controllers instructed Ava to begin a slow descent. Athens International Airport had the clearest weather window, and the Greek Air Force confirmed the airspace was clear. The fighter jets adjusted position, one ahead and one to her side, guiding her path visually through the thick clouds. Ava began to bring the throttle levers back, slowly reducing engine power. The aircraft shuddered, slightly as altitude dropped from 28,000 to 20,000 feet. Her ears popped, her heart pounded, but she kept her movement steady. Through the headset, faint instructions guided her: headings, altitudes, speed. The Boeing's autothrottle was unreliable, so she adjusted manually, careful not to lose lift. The rain intensified, streaking across the cockpit glass. Lightning flashed far in the distance. At 18,000 feet, she caught her first glimpse of land. Through a break in the clouds, the coastline of Greece, sunlit and wet from passing storms. For the first time, she felt hope, but hope didn't last long. A sudden warning blared. Hydraulic pressure low. One of the 3 redundant systems had failed, meaning the aircraft's braking and steering could become unreliable during landing. The backup systems still worked, but any mistake could mean disaster. Her pulse quickened. She took a deep breath, remembering her father's voice again. "You don't fight the aircraft, you fly with it." She adjusted her descent rate, reducing vertical speed to avoid strain. The fighter jets continued their silent escort, relaying her position to air traffic control below. The controllers at Athens cleared all airspace, a direct path to the longest runway, lined with emergency vehicles and medical teams. Every eye on the ground was now watching the radar screen, waiting for her signal. By the time Flight 209 dropped below 10,000 feet, visibility improved. The runway lights of Athens International glowed through the rain. The city stretched out beyond it, unaware that a teenage girl was guiding 250 souls to safety above their heads. Ava reviewed what she remembered from simulator landings: approach speed, flaps, landing gear timing. She checked the instrument panel, left hydraulic system offline, Right engine stable, gear lights ready. One step at a time. She extended the landing gear lever. A loud clunk echoed through the fuselage, followed by the vibration of wheels locking into place. The passengers gasped when they heard it. They knew it meant one thing: they were going to land. The flight attendants prepared everyone, securing the cabin, giving safety instructions in trembling voices. In the cockpit, Ava held the controls tighter. She could feel the aircraft slowing, descending through 4,000 feet. Rain streaks turned to mist as the runway expanded. Before her, like a silver path through the storm. The fighter jet pilot beside her raised his hand again, this time giving her a thumbs up. All across Europe, television networks were now live with updates. A young passenger attempting an emergency landing. Every second was being tracked by radar, every altitude drop marked on the screen. Millions of people watched in silence. Inside the Boeing, Ava's mind was blank. No fear, no noise, only focus. Her eyes followed the runway alignment. Her hand adjusted the throttle. Her left foot hovered near the rudder pedals. The autopilot disengaged completely as she took full manual control. The massive jet descended to 1,000 feet. The airport tower confirmed visual contact. Fire trucks and ambulances lined the tarmac. The air was thick with rain and wind, but the path was clear. Ava whispered to herself. Not words of fear, but of strength. The kind her father used to say before takeoff. And then, with every ounce of courage she had, she began her final approach. The storm had fully surrounded Flight 209. Thunder rolled across the sky as sheets of rain hammered the fuselage. Wind buffeted the wings, tilting the jet slightly side to side. Below the dense clouds, the lights of Athens International Airport glowed faintly, a flicker of hope in the chaos. Inside the cockpit, Ava Williams sat in complete focus. Her face was pale, eyes locked on the glowing instruments. The world outside had narrowed to one goal: land the aircraft safely. Her pulse beat in rhythm with the rain striking the glass. Every second mattered. The Boeing 787's autopilot had disengaged entirely. She was flying manually now, a task even experienced pilots feared in storm conditions. But there was no one else to do it. At 3,000 feet, the aircraft jolted violently as a gust of crosswind hit its left side. The wings dipped. Warning alarms sounded again. Ava countered the roll instinctively, pushing the control yoke slightly right, steadying the plane. She could barely see the runway ahead through the rain, just faint lines of white and orange lights shimmering in the mist. The fighter jet beside her kept its position, flashing its landing lights twice, a signal of encouragement. In the cabin behind her, passengers held each other's hands, whispering prayers. The flight attendants sat strapped in, tears streaming silently. They all knew the next few minutes would decide everything. Ava adjusted the throttle, reducing speed. The massive aircraft responded, engines humming lower. The descent rate stabilized, 700 feet per minute. Still too fast, but manageable. Wind gusts pushed the plane again, tilting it off course. She corrected once more, using small, deliberate movements. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes darting between the altitude indicator, airspeed gauge, and the dim runway lights ahead. Every control movement, every adjustment was survival. Moments of fear. At 2,500 feet, turbulence intensified. The aircraft shook violently, overhead bins rattling, cabin lights flickering. A loud thump echoed from beneath as the landing gear locked fully in place. Then another warning flashed: hydraulic pressure critical. Her heart pounded. This meant one side of the braking system might not respond. She would have to rely on thrust reversers and luck to stop. But she didn't let go of the controls. Her grip tightened. She whispered to herself, calm, steady, believing that she could do this. The fighter jets began to pull away, clearing her path. The runway was now directly ahead, a glowing river of light through the storm. Ava aligned the plane perfectly with the center line. The altimeter ticked down, 800 feet. 500, 300. The storm outside was deafening. Lightning flashing across the clouds like camera shutters, capturing her final moments of courage. The wheels of the Boeing 787 sliced through, the mist as it descended toward the runway. At 100 feet, she gently pulled the nose up, reducing descent rate. The rain blurred everything outside, but the runway lights remained visible, her single guide through chaos. The main landing gear hit first. A heavy thud echoed through the fuselage, followed by a bounce. Then the front wheel slammed down. Passengers screamed, oxygen masks swinging. Ava immediately deployed the thrust reversers, engines roaring in reverse, sending spray and mist behind the plane. The aircraft fishtailed slightly under wet conditions, sliding a few meters off-center before regaining grip. Her hands worked in sync, throttles back. Rudder corrections, steady braking pressure. The hydraulics groaned but held. The end of the runway approached fast, red lights flashing in the distance. And then, after 40 seconds of sheer terror, the massive jet slowed. The roar faded into the steady hum of engines idling. The Boeing came to a stop just short of the safety barrier. For a moment, there was only silence. Then applause, crying, shouts. The cabin filled with disbelief and gratitude. People hugged strangers. Others simply bowed their heads and sobbed. In the cockpit, Ava's hands trembled over the controls. Her breathing was uneven. The headset buzzed faintly, with the distant voice of air. Traffic control confirming the impossible. Flight 209 had landed safely. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within minutes. Red and blue lights reflected off the wet runway. Firefighters, paramedics, and ground crew rushed to assist, expecting disaster. But what they found instead was a miracle. When the cockpit door opened, a young girl stood there, exhausted and pale but alive. The lead attendant, tears in her eyes, wrapped her arms around her. The passengers began chanting her name. "Ava! Ava!" Their voices breaking through the storm. Outside, the fighter, jet pilots who had escorted her, saluted from their cockpits before, peeling away into the clouds. Ava stepped down from the plane hours later, her legs shaking as she touched the ground. Cameras flashed, rescue teams surrounded her, but she barely noticed. Her mind was still replaying every second of that landing, every sound, every warning, every heartbeat. By the next morning, the story had spread across the globe. Headlines read, "Teenage passenger saves 250 lives. 18-year-old lands Boeing 787 after pilot's collapse." Miracle in the skies, the girl who became a pilot in one flight. Ava became a symbol of courage, a reminder that bravery isn't about age or experience, but about heart and composure when the world falls apart. Airline experts analyzed her every move, amazed at how accurately she handled the descent and landing. Despite minimal training, flight simulators were tested with her same scenario, and most professional pilots admitted they might not have done better under such failure conditions. She didn't call herself a hero. When reporters asked how she did it, she simply said she remembered her father's words and never stopped believing the plane would listen if she stayed calm. The rain had stopped. What remained was silence, the kind that follows a storm too great to describe. Flight 209 rested at the far end of Athens International Airport, its engines cooling, its metal skin glistening under the soft gray morning light. Inside the aircraft, people were still in shock. Some prayed, some cried. Others simply stared out the windows at the dozens of emergency vehicles surrounding them. They were alive, every single one of them. And at the center of it all was Ava Williams, the 18-year-old girl who had done the impossible. As the passengers began to disembark, paramedics rushed inside to assist the unconscious pilots. Both were found alive but suffering from oxygen deprivation, the same system failure that had started the chaos hours earlier. When Ava stepped out of the cockpit, her hands still trembling, the world outside erupted into flashes of light, cameras, rescue lights, and the morning sun breaking through the mist. She looked dazed, barely believing what had just happened. Firefighters and medics surrounded her, asking questions she could hardly process. The lead flight attendant held her hand the entire time, as if afraid she'd disappear the moment she let go. Reporters were already gathering beyond the barriers, their lenses pointed at the drenched, exhausted teenager walking down the mobile stairs of a jet that should have never landed safely. For the passengers, she was not just a savior, she was proof that miracles still happen. Within hours, the story had spread across every major news network on Earth. Headlines filled every screen. Teenager saves 250 lives in mid-air emergency. 18-year-old lands passenger jet alone, a miracle in the sky. The girl who became a pilot in one flight. Television anchors described her calmness. Aviation experts broke down the flight path and landing sequence, calling it a textbook maneuver in impossible conditions. Social media exploded with videos of passengers praising her courage. The world wanted to know who she was, where she came from, and how she had found the strength to do what trained professionals might not have survived. But while the world celebrated, Ava sat quietly in a small airport room wrapped in a blanket, her mind replaying every second of those terrifying hours. She didn't feel like a hero. She just felt grateful that she was still breathing, that they were all still here. Days later, the Aviation Board began its investigation. Experts examined every inch of the Boeing 787, its black box, its systems, its electrical network. What they discovered stunned them. It was a perfect storm of human error and mechanical failure. A tiny unnoticed short circuit in one of the main power buses had triggered a cascading failure that knocked out oxygen supply to the cockpit, disabling both pilots within minutes. The backup system, meant to compensate, had been under maintenance weeks earlier, an oversight missed by a chain of technicians. In simple terms, it was a perfect storm of human error and mechanical failure. Yet, even more incredible was how the plane had survived despite multiple system losses. The way it was flown, the altitude control, the landing speed, the stabilizer adjustments matched that of a trained pilot. But it hadn't been a pilot. It had been an 18-year-old girl flying by instinct, memory, and courage. The final report called it a unique case of civilian flight, control under duress resulting in full passenger survival, statistically impossible. Weeks later, a formal ceremony was held at Global Airways headquarters. Ava stood on stage in front of hundreds of officials, pilots, and the passengers whose lives she had saved. The hall was filled with applause, flashbulbs, and emotion when the airline's chief officer presented her with the Medal of Civil Aviation bravery, he said. In the face of fear, she found focus. In chaos, she found control. In the skies, she found her destiny. Her father, a commercial pilot himself, sat in the front row with tears in his eyes. He had spent his life teaching her to love the skies, and she had proved herself among them in ways no one ever imagined. When the applause ended, Ava spoke softly to the audience. She didn't talk about fear or fame. She spoke about responsibility. How every life on that plane had depended not on training, but on courage. How heroes aren't born. They're created in moments when there's no one else left to act. Months later, the story of Flight 209 became part of aviation history. Simulators recreated the exact conditions of the flight. Experts tested professional pilots against the same failure. Almost none could land safely without full systems. Ava's decisions were analyzed, taught, and studied in aviation schools worldwide. They called her approach the Williams method, a blend of calm reaction and instinctive control. She was later granted honorary flight certification and began real pilot training soon after. The skies that once tested her now became her home. In interviews, she always said the same thing. She didn't see herself as a savior, just someone who refused to give up. A year later, on the anniversary of Flight 209, she returned to Athens. The same airport, the same runway, the same quiet air that once held chaos. A new Boeing 787 waited there, this time with her name painted under the cockpit window. Ava Williams, the miracle pilot. She walked along the tarmac, running her hand across the polished metal, feeling the hum of the engines beneath her fingers. The fear she once felt was gone, replaced by peace. Above her, clouds drifted lazily across the sunlit sky, and the world seemed to stand still. For her, it wasn't about fame or headlines. It was about second chances, for life, for hope, for belief. Ava looked up, smiled, and whispered to herself, not as a passenger this time, but as a pilot who had earned her wings through fire. The storm had tested her. The sky had accepted her, and the world would never forget her name.